The distant hum of the Helios runner's engines had become a comforting white noise to EMTT Hartford after 3 months aboard. He stood at his security station, eyes methodically scanning the sensor readouts as the massive transport vessel cut through the void at the edge of the Verdanton star system. The blue-tinged light of his console cast shadows across the scars on his forearms, remnants of his military past that he preferred to forget. Security Chief Hartford, Captain Weiss's voice crackled through the comm system. Status report on our approach to the border checkpoint. EMTT straightened his posture instinctively. 5 years removed from Special Forces, and still his body responded to authority with military precision. All systems nominal, Captain. Verdanton Border Patrol has acknowledged our presence and verified our diplomatic clearance. Excellent. Remember, we're carrying sensitive trade materials. The Verdantons are particularly touchy about their borders these days. Ambassador Reeves would have my head if we caused even the slightest diplomatic ripple. Understood, sir. EMTT's eyes drifted to the holographic display showing the vast expanse of the Verdanton system, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. The Verdantons were known for their technological prowess and their deeply conservative society centered around their royal lineage. The diplomatic accord signed between humans and Verdantons 3 years ago remained as fragile as spun glass. EMTT resumed his monitoring duties, grateful for the quiet. After the horrors he'd witnessed in the Proxima conflict, he'd sought the most uncomplicated assignment possible. Ship security on a diplomatic transport was supposed to be routine, checking credentials, monitoring sensors, occasionally dealing with a drunk engineer. No life or death decisions. No blood on his hands. The tranquility of his shift shattered as a proximity alert blared through the command deck. EMTT's hands flew across the console, pulling up sensor data. Captain, we're detecting a distress signal approximately 30,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. EMTT's training kicked in as he analyzed the readings. It's a Verdanton vessel. Royal markings. He paused, frowning at the data. Heavy damage to their propulsion systems, and there are multiple fire signatures aboard. Captain Weiss appeared at his shoulder, face tightening with concern. Magnify the visual. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a sleek silver vessel trailing plumes of blue-green vapor into space. Emblazoned on its hull were the elaborate insignia of Verdanton royalty. That's a royal courier vessel, Ambassador Reeves said as he hurried onto the bridge. The middle-aged diplomat's usually composed features were pinched with worry. Captain, we need to contact Verdanton authorities immediately. Already done, Weiss replied. They're dispatching emergency personnel, but their nearest vessel is nearly 2 hours away. EMTT enhanced the sensor readings, focusing on life signs. His blood ran cold. Captain, I'm detecting multiple life forms aboard. At least 3 of them are children. Based on their vital signs and the atmospheric degradation inside the vessel, they have less than 40 minutes of breathable air remaining. The bridge fell silent. We have to help them, EMTT said, already calculating the fastest approach vector. Ambassador Reeves shook his head emphatically. Absolutely not. Verdanton protocol expressly forbids interference with royal vessels without explicit permission from their High Council. The diplomatic consequences. With all due respect, Ambassador, EMTT interrupted, there are children aboard who will die before help arrives. Captain Weiss's expression hardened. Hartford, I understand your concern, but the ambassador is correct. Our orders are explicit. We maintain diplomatic protocols at all costs. The Verdantons are extremely protective of their royal family. Unauthorized contact could jeopardize years of diplomatic progress. EMTT felt a familiar weight settling in his chest, the same crushing pressure he'd felt in the Proxima conflict when ordered to stand down as civilians were caught in the crossfire. He'd followed orders then, and the nightmares still haunted him every night. Captain, he said quietly, I can't stand by and watch children die. Not again. Weiss fixed him with a stern glare. That's an order, Chief Hartford. We wait for Verdanton response. EMTT stared at the burning ship on the view screen. The oxygen levels inside continued to drop. Memories flashed through his mind. Screaming children on Proxima 4, his commanding officer's voice ordering retreat, the subsequent nightmares that had driven him from military service. "Sir," he said, voice hollow, "I have to respectfully refuse that order." Without waiting for a response, EMTT locked down his station and strode toward the turbolift. "Hartford," Weiss called after him. "If you take that shuttle, you're risking court-martial." EMTT paused at the lift door. "Better that than more dead children on my conscience, sir." As the turbolift doors closed, he heard Ambassador Reeves shouting about diplomatic incidents and career suicide. None of it mattered now. Minutes later, EMTT guided the Helios runner's emergency shuttle out of the docking bay, plotting an intercept course with the damaged royal vessel. "This is EMTT Hartford of Earth vessel Helios runner," he broadcast on all frequencies. "I'm approaching to render emergency assistance. Please acknowledge." Only static answered him as he pushed the shuttle's engines to maximum thrust. Through the viewport, the stricken Verdanton ship grew larger, its elegant, biomechanical form marred by ruptures along the port side. Unlike the purely mechanical human vessels, Verdanton ships incorporated living elements, with sections that pulsed and changed color to indicate system status. The ship before him was flickering between alarming shades of red and black. As EMTT docked with the vessel's emergency airlock, alarms blared in his shuttle. "Warning, environmental hazards detected. Hull integrity of target vessel compromised. Toxic atmosphere present." He sealed his emergency suit, double-checking the oxygen supply and the medkit strapped to his belt. The airlock cycled, and EMTT stepped into hell. Blue flames licked along the walls of the corridor, feeding on some kind of organic fuel. The ship itself seemed to be crying out in pain, the bioluminescent pathways that normally guided passengers pulsing erratically. Smoke curled through the air, reducing visibility to mere meters. EMTT activated his suit's life sign tracker. 3 small signals pulsed approximately 100 meters ahead, past a tangle of collapsed ceiling panels and ruptured conduits. Drawing on his military training, EMTT began methodically working his way forward. The heat inside the vessel was incredible, overwhelming his suit's cooling systems and causing sweat to pour down his face inside his helmet. Twice he was forced to use his emergency cutter to slice through debris blocking his path. "Hello," he called out, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "I'm here to help. Is anyone there?" A shrill, terrified voice responded in the musical language of the Verdantins. EMTT couldn't understand the words, but the fear was universal. He pushed forward faster, ignoring the searing pain as a piece of falling debris grazed his leg. Finally, he reached what appeared to be a sealed compartment. The door was partially melted, but the emergency force field inside was still functioning, protecting the occupants from the toxic atmosphere outside. Through the shimmering barrier, EMTT could make out 3 small figures huddled together. "I'm here to help," he said, gesturing to his suit emblem that identified him as a human. "Your ship is badly damaged. I need to get you to safety." The tallest of the 3 stepped forward, a boy who couldn't have been more than 12 Earth years old. Despite his obvious fear, he carried himself with a regal bearing that marked him instantly as royalty. His skin had the characteristic pale blue tint of Verdantins, with iridescent markings along his temples that glowed faintly in the dim emergency lighting. "You are human," the boy said in accented but clear English. "I am Prince Elian of House Verdant. These are my siblings, Princess Mira and Prince Terran." He gestured to a slightly younger girl and a much smaller boy, both watching EMTT with wide, frightened eyes. "My name is Emmett Hartford. I've come from the human vessel Helios runner to rescue you. We don't have much time. Your life support systems are failing." Prince Elian's chin lifted proudly. "I warn you, human, if you intend us harm, our mother, Queen Lena, will have you executed slowly over many days." Despite the dire situation, EMTT felt a smile tug at his lips. "I promise you, Your Highness, I mean only to get you safely to my shuttle. Then we can wait for your people to arrive. A violent tremor shook the ship, and the emergency lights flickered ominously. The containment fields are failing, Prince Elian said, his young voice remarkably steady. We must go now. Yimtiti nodded, helping the children activate the emergency breather masks stored near the door. Stay close to me. Don't touch anything, and if I tell you to duck or run, do it immediately. The journey back through the burning vessel was a nightmare. Twice they were forced to take detours as corridors collapsed behind them. Princess Mira stumbled once, crying out as her arm was caught by a falling panel. Yimtiti scooped her up without breaking stride, his military training kicking in as he calculated and recalculated their escape route. Young Prince Terran whimpered with fear, but followed instructions perfectly, staying right behind his older brother. The ship groaned around them like a dying beast, the biomechanical components emitting distress signals that resonated painfully in their ears. They were almost at the airlock when EMTT noticed something strange about the damage patterns. The burns along certain junctions weren't consistent with an accidental system failure or collision. They showed the distinctive signature of directed energy weapons. The ship hadn't malfunctioned. It had been attacked. Before he could process this realization, a massive explosion rocked the vessel. Yimtiti instinctively threw himself over the royal children as superheated debris rained down around them. Something heavy and molten struck his back, searing through his protective suit and into the flesh beneath. The pain was blinding, but he forced himself to stay conscious. The shuttle, he gasped. We're almost there. But when they reached the airlock, they found it hopelessly mangled by the explosion. No, Yimtiti breathed, fighting down panic. There has to be another way. Prince Elian tugged at his sleeve. The emergency escape pod. It's near the royal quarters, this way. They raced through the dying ship, EMTT's vision beginning to blur from pain and blood loss. The back of his suit was completely compromised now, exposing him to the toxic atmosphere. Each breath felt like swallowing fire. The escape pod was thankfully intact, a sleek, organic-looking craft nestled in a protective alcove. As they approached, Prince Elian placed his palm against a glowing panel. Nothing happened. It requires royal biological verification, the prince explained, panic edging into his voice as he tried again. But something's wrong. It's not recognizing me. EMTT examined the panel through pain-hazed eyes. The circuitry's been tampered with, he realized aloud. This wasn't an accident or random attack. Someone had deliberately targeted the royal children and sabotaged their escape routes. Another explosion rocked the ship, closer this time. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. Stand back, EMTT ordered, pulling an emergency tool from his belt. With practiced movements, he bypassed the damaged authentication circuit, rerouting the power directly to the launch mechanism. The pod's door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, quickly, he urged, helping the children into the cramped space. Prince Terran, the youngest, looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. You're hurt, the small boy said in halting English. EMTT managed a reassuring smile, despite the agony radiating from his back. I'll be fine, Your Highness. As he squeezed his larger frame into the pod designed for Verdantan physiology, EMTT felt consciousness beginning to slip away. With the last of his strength, he initiated the launch sequence and pulled Prince Terran protectively against his chest as the escape pod blasted free from the dying ship. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the royal vessel erupting into a spectacular ball of blue-green flame. EMTT drifted through swirling mists of consciousness, catching fragments of sensations and conversations. Cool hands touching his burning skin. Musical voices speaking urgently in an alien tongue. The sensation of being immersed in something gelatinous yet comforting. When he finally opened his eyes fully, he found himself in a chamber unlike anything he'd seen before. The walls seemed alive, pulsing gently with bioluminescent patterns that shifted from calming blues to healing greens. He lay on a bed that conformed perfectly to his body, supporting him in a semi-reclined position. The human awakens, a melodic voice observed. EMTT turned his head to see a tall Verdantan healer standing beside his bed, her iridescent skin markings identifying her as a member of the medical cast. Beyond her stood a figure that made EMTT's breath catch. She was unmistakably the queen. Her royal markings glowed with an inner light that outshone everyone else in the room. Her face bore the same delicate features as the children he had rescued, though her expressions were carefully controlled in a way theirs had not been. She wore an elaborate gown that seemed to shift between solid fabric and liquid light. "Your Majesty," EMTT attempted to sit up, only to be gently but firmly pushed back by the healer. "Remain still. Emmett Hartford of Earth," Queen Lena said, approaching his bedside. "You have suffered extensive injuries. The healing process is not yet complete." Her English was flawless, with only the slightest musical lilt betraying her alien origin. "The children," EMTT said urgently. "Are they? My children are safe, thanks to your intervention." The Queen's voice softened slightly. "You have my personal gratitude for their rescue." EMTT closed his eyes briefly in relief. "I'm glad I could help, Your Majesty. However," she continued, her tone cooling, "you have violated numerous diplomatic protocols. You entered restricted royal space without permission. You made physical contact with members of the royal house. These are serious transgressions under our laws." Before EMTT could respond, the door to the chamber slid open, and a stern-faced Verdantan male entered, flanked by 2 guards in formal armor. His elaborate robes and the complex pattern of markings across his forehead identified him as a high-ranking official. "Your Majesty," the newcomer said with a deep bow, "the High Council requests your presence. The human interloper must be officially charged with violations of our sacred laws." Queen Lena regarded the official coolly. "High Elder Varric, I did not authorize your entry into the royal healing chambers." Varric bowed again, though EMTT noticed his markings pulsed with a color that seemed to indicate irritation. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the Council is most insistent. The human violated our most sacred boundaries. The diplomatic incident with Earth grows more complicated by the hour." As if on cue, Ambassador Reeves hurried into the room, looking harried and exhausted. "Your Majesty, Elder Varric," he acknowledged with hasty bows. "I've come to offer Earth's formal apologies for this unauthorized action. I assure you that Chief Hartford acted entirely on his own, against explicit orders." EMTT tried to sit up again, ignoring the pain that lanced through his back. "The ship was attacked," he said firmly. "It wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately targeted the royal children and sabotaged their escape routes." A heavy silence fell over the room. "These are serious accusations," Varric said finally, his voice dangerously soft. "Do you have evidence of these claims?" "I saw the damage patterns," EMTT insisted. "I've been in enough combat situations to recognize weapon signatures. And the escape pod's authentication system was tampered with. Prince Elian couldn't activate it with his royal biometrics." Queen Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. "This will be investigated thoroughly," she declared. "Until then, the matter of the humans' transgressions remains." Ambassador Reeves stepped forward, diplomatic smile firmly in place. "Your Majesty, if I might suggest, perhaps in light of Chief Hartford's heroic actions, some leniency could be considered. After all, without his intervention, the royal children would have perished." High Elder Varric made a dismissive gesture. "Laws cannot be set aside for convenience, Ambassador. The sanctity of royal space and persons is absolute." Queen Lena raised a hand, silencing him. "There's a sacred debt here," she said quietly. "This human risked his life to save my children. Our most ancient laws acknowledge such debts." She approached EMTT's bedside again, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Tell me, Emmett Hartford, why did you disobey your captain's orders to rescue my children?" EMTT met her gaze steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do. I've stood by before when innocents were in danger, following orders that went against my conscience. I couldn't do that again." Something shifted in the queen's expression, a subtle softening around her eyes that would have been imperceptible to someone unfamiliar with Verdantin facial cues. "I believe you," she said simply. Then she turned to face Varric and the ambassador. "I have made my decision. The ancient rites provide a path forward." She gestured, and a royal attendant stepped forward, bearing a crystalline container. Inside swirled a luminescent blue-silver fluid that seemed to respond to the queen's proximity, reaching toward her like a living thing. Varric's eyes widened in shock. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot be suggesting." "The sacred bond," Queen Lena confirmed. "This human has earned the right to be connected to the royal house through the ancient ritual. It will satisfy the laws requiring royal permission for his actions and acknowledge the debt we owe him." YMTT glanced between them in confusion. "I don't understand. What is this sacred bond?" Ambassador Reeves looked equally baffled. This clearly went beyond his extensive diplomatic briefings on Verdantin culture. "It is our highest honor," Queen Lena explained. "A ritual linking of minds and life forces, reserved for those who have proven themselves worthy beyond all question. It would connect you to the royal house, granting you certain rights and protections under our laws. It would also defile thousands of years of royal lineage." Varric protested, his markings flashing angry red. "The sacred bond has never been offered to an off-worlder, let alone a human. My children live because of this man's courage," the queen replied, her voice taking on an edge that silenced Varric instantly. "The ancient texts are clear. One who saves royal blood at risk of their own life may be offered the bond. There is no stipulation regarding species." EMTT's head swam, and not just from his injuries. The implications were staggering. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I don't fully understand what this entails." "It is a permanent connection," she explained. "Your consciousness would be linked to mine on a fundamental level. You would share in certain aspects of my perception, and I in yours. The royal essence," she indicated the swirling liquid, "would alter your biology slightly to accommodate the connection." EMTT felt a chill run down his spine. "And if I refuse? Then you would be judged according to our laws for your transgressions, though I would speak for leniency," the queen answered honestly. "But I do not offer this lightly, Emmett Hartford. I have looked into your mind while you healed, and I have seen your heart. You are worthy of this honor." The revelation that she had already been inside his mind should have disturbed him more than it did. Instead, EMTT felt an unexpected pull toward the idea, a sense of rightness he couldn't explain. "You cannot seriously be considering this," Ambassador Reeves interjected. "Hartford, this goes well beyond your authority. Earth has no protocols for this kind of biological diplomacy." EMTT barely heard him. His eyes were locked with Queen Lena's, and in their depths he saw something that resonated with his own soul, a deep well of responsibility, the weight of lives depending on her decisions, and a fierce protectiveness toward her children that he instinctively understood. "I accept," he said quietly. Varric made a strangled sound of outrage. "This is an abomination. The council will never." "The council's approval is not required for the sacred bond," Queen Lena interrupted. "This is the prerogative of the sovereign alone." She turned to EMTT with a slight incline of her head. "The ritual will be prepared for tomorrow, when you have regained more of your strength." With that, she swept from the room, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Varric followed after giving EMTT a look of pure venom, and the ambassador lingered only long enough to whisper, "Do you have any idea what you just done?" EMTT wasn't sure he did, but as he sank back against the living bed, feeling its healing energies work on his wounded back, he couldn't shake the feeling that for the first time since the Proxima conflict, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sacred temple of Verdant Prime defied human architectural understanding. It wasn't so much built as grown, a cathedral-like space of crystalline arches that seemed to have emerged organically from the living rock of the planet. Bioluminescent vines coiled around pillars that stretched toward a dome open to the twin moons of Verdantin. The ceiling itself appeared liquid, rippling with patterns of light that responded to the movements of those below. EMTT stood at the entrance, dressed in ceremonial attire provided by the royal tailors. A form-fitting suit of material that felt halfway between silk and living skin, adorned with patterns that echoed the royal insignia, but remained distinct. The garment adjusted continuously to his body temperature and movements, creating an unsettling but not unpleasant sensation. "It suits you," said a small voice beside him. EMTT looked down to see Prince Terran, the youngest of the royal children, staring up at him with solemn eyes. "Thank you, Your Highness. I'm not used to clothes quite so interactive." The young prince smiled shyly. "Mother says you'll become part of us today." Before EMTT could respond, Ambassador Reeves approached, his expression tense. "Hartford, I've spent the entire night trying to get clarification on exactly what this ritual entails. The Verdantan authorities have been frustratingly vague, citing sacred traditions that cannot be explained to outsiders. And yet I'm about to participate in them," EMTT noted wryly. "This is unprecedented," Reeves continued, lowering his voice. "Earth Command is concerned about the potential implications. There are questions about whether this constitutes a form of genetic manipulation or even mind control." EMTT felt a flicker of doubt. The ambassador's concerns weren't unreasonable. "I've made my decision," he said finally. "The Queen could have had me imprisoned or worse for violating their laws. Instead, she's offering their highest honor. But at what cost?" Reeves pressed. Before EMTT could answer, a resonant tone echoed through the temple, and the assembled Verdantans, royal guards, officials, and a small number of nobles who had been granted the privilege of witnessing the historic event, fell silent. Queen Lena entered from the far side of the temple, and EMTT's breath caught. She was transformed from the regal but restrained monarch he had met in the healing chamber. Today, she seemed to glow from within, her royal markings pulsing with vibrant blue-silver light that matched the ceremonial robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. Her hair, normally bound in elaborate braids, fell free in iridescent waves to her waist. Behind her walked Prince Elian and Princess Mira, similarly adorned though less radiant. They took positions on either side of a circular pool at the center of the temple, a pool filled with the same luminescent fluid EMTT had seen in the crystalline container. A hush fell over the assembly as Queen Lena addressed them, first in a musical Verdantan language, then in English. "Today we honor an ancient debt and forge a sacred bond," she proclaimed. "This human, Emmett Hartford, risked his life to save the royal bloodline when all hope seemed lost. Our most ancient laws recognize such sacrifice as worthy of our highest honor." EMTT was aware of the tension in the room, the mix of awe, tradition, and unmistakable resistance from certain quarters. High Elder Varric stood to one side, his expression carefully neutral, but his markings betraying his disapproval with flashes of angry red. "Approach, Emmett Hartford of Earth," the Queen commanded. EMTT walked forward, acutely conscious of every eye upon him. The ceremonial clothing seemed to respond to his nervousness, tightening slightly, then relaxing in a pattern that felt oddly like a reassuring touch. When he reached the edge of the pool, Queen Lena extended her hand. "The sacred bond connects minds, hearts, and life forces. It is not entered into lightly, nor can it ever be broken. Are you prepared to accept this connection?" EMTT looked into her eyes and saw not just the Queen, but the mother whose children he had saved, a woman bearing the weight of an entire civilization on her shoulders, yet vulnerable in this moment of unprecedented change. "I am," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. She nodded once, then spoke ritual words in Verdantan that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The luminescent pool began to swirl more rapidly, responding to her voice. "Now we enter the waters of connection," she instructed, stepping gracefully into the pool. The fluid rose to meet her, swirling around her body as if joyfully greeting an old friend. EMTT followed, surprised to find the liquid warm and oddly comforting as it enveloped his legs. It seemed to seep through his ceremonial clothing, touching his skin directly, yet leaving no wet sensation. Queen Lena reached out, taking both his hands in hers. The words of bonding are simple, but their meaning transcends language. Repeat after me. 2 minds, 1 understanding. 2 hearts, 1 purpose. 2 lives, 1 shared path. YMTT repeated the phrase, feeling a strange resonance building within him as the words left his lips. The luminous fluid began to rise higher, swirling around their joined hands. Now drink of the royal essence, the queen instructed, releasing one of his hands to scoop some of the glowing liquid in her palm. She raised it to her lips and drank, then gestured for EMTT to do the same. He hesitated only briefly before gathering the luminescent fluid and bringing it to his mouth. It tasted like nothing he had ever experienced. Not sweet or bitter or salty, but somehow all sensations at once, a symphony of taste that echoed through his entire being. The moment the liquid touched his throat, EMTT felt a shock wave of sensation. The temple around him seemed to fade as his awareness expanded exponentially. Suddenly, he could feel the queen's presence not as a separate entity, but as an extension of himself. Her thoughts, memories, and emotions flowing into his consciousness like tributaries joining a river. He gasped as millennia of royal history flashed through his mind. The weight of tradition, the responsibility of leadership, the fierce love of a mother for her children. Simultaneously, he sensed his own memories flowing outward, sharing his experiences of Earth, the horrors of the Proxima conflict, and the driving need for redemption that had led him to disobey orders and save the royal children. As their minds began to synchronize, the luminous fluid rose higher, now swirling around their torsos. EMTT felt no fear, only a profound sense of connection unlike anything he had ever known. This was not the erasure of self he might have feared, but rather an expansion, becoming more while still remaining who he was. The ritual reached its crescendo as the fluid completely enveloped them both, creating a pillar of light that stretched toward the open dome above. Through their growing bond, EMTT sensed Queen Lena's satisfaction as the ancient energies worked as they should, forging connections that transcended physical limitations. The moment of perfect union was shattered by a sudden blast of energy that struck the luminous pillar, sending discordant ripples through the sacred fluid. EMTT felt Queen Lena's shock and pain through their partially formed bond and instinctively pulled. She turned to EMTT with a slight incline of her head. The ritual will be prepared for tomorrow, when you have regained more of your strength. With that, she swept from the room, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Varric followed after giving EMTT a look of pure venom, and the ambassador lingered only long enough to whisper, "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" EMTT wasn't sure he did, but as he sank back against the living bed, feeling its healing energies work on his wounded back, he couldn't shake the feeling that for the first time since the Proxima conflict, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sacred temple of Verdant Prime defied human architectural understanding. It wasn't so much built as grown, a cathedral-like space of crystalline arches that seemed to have emerged organically from the living rock of the planet. Bioluminescent vines coiled around pillars that stretched toward a dome open to the twin moons of Verdannon. The ceiling itself appeared liquid, rippling with patterns of light that responded to the movements of those below. EMTT stood at the entrance, dressed in ceremonial attire provided by the royal tailors. A form-fitting suit of material that fell halfway between silk and living skin, adorned with patterns that echoed the royal insignia, but remained distinct. The garment adjusted continuously to his body temperature and movements, creating an unsettling but not unpleasant sensation. "It suits you," said a small voice beside him. EMTT looked down to see Prince Terran, the youngest of the royal children, staring up at him with solemn eyes. "Thank you, Your Highness. I'm not used to clothes quite so interactive." The young prince smiled shyly. "Mother says you'll become part of us today." Before EMTT could respond, Ambassador Reeves approached, his expression tense. Hartford, I've spent the entire night trying to get clarification on exactly what this ritual entails. The Verdantin authorities have been frustratingly vague, citing sacred traditions that cannot be explained to outsiders. And yet I'm about to participate in them, Yimtiti noted wryly. This is unprecedented, Reeves continued, lowering his voice. Earth Command is concerned about the potential implications. There are questions about whether this constitutes a form of genetic manipulation or even mind control. EMTT felt a flicker of doubt. The ambassador's concerns weren't unreasonable. I've made my decision, he said finally. The Queen could have had me imprisoned or worse for violating their laws. Instead, she's offering their highest honor. But at what cost? Reeves pressed. Before EMTT could answer, the resonant tone echoed through the temple, and the assembled Verdantins, royal guards, officials, and a small number of nobles who had been granted the privilege of witnessing the historic event, fell silent. Queen Lena entered from the far side of the temple, and EMTT's breath caught. She was transformed from the regal but restrained monarch he had met in the healing chamber. Today, she seemed to glow from within, her royal markings pulsing with vibrant blue-silver light that matched the ceremonial robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. Her hair, normally bound in elaborate braids, fell free in iridescent waves to her waist. Behind her walked Prince Elian and Princess Mira, similarly adorned though less radiant. They took positions on either side of a circular pool at the center of the temple, a pool filled with the same luminescent fluid EMTT had seen in the crystalline container. A hush fell over the assembly as Queen Lena addressed them, first in the musical Verdantin language, then in English. Today we honor an ancient debt and forge a sacred bond, she proclaimed. This human, Emmett Hartford, risked his life to save the royal bloodline when all hope seemed lost. Our most ancient laws recognize such sacrifice as worthy of our highest honor. EMTT was aware of the tension in the room, the mix of awe, tradition, and unmistakable resistance from certain quarters. High Elder Varric stood to one side, his expression carefully neutral, but his markings betraying his disapproval with flashes of angry red. Approach, Emmett Hartford of Earth, the Queen commanded. EMTT walked forward, acutely conscious of every eye upon him. The ceremonial clothing seemed to respond to his nervousness, tightening slightly, then relaxing in a pattern that felt oddly like a reassuring touch. When he reached the edge of the pool, Queen Lena extended her hand. The sacred bond connects minds, hearts, and life forces. It is not entered into lightly, nor can it ever be broken. Are you prepared to accept this connection? EMTT looked into her eyes and saw not just the Queen, but the mother whose children he had saved, a woman bearing the weight of an entire civilization on her shoulders, yet vulnerable in this moment of unprecedented change. I am, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. She nodded once, then spoke ritual words in Verdantin that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The luminescent pool began to swirl more rapidly, responding to her voice. Now we enter the waters of connection, she instructed, stepping gracefully into the pool. The fluid rose too. Meet her, swirling around her body as if joyfully greeting an old friend. EMTT followed, surprised to find the liquid warm and oddly comforting as it enveloped his legs. It seemed to seep through his ceremonial clothing, touching his skin directly, yet leaving no wet sensation. Queen Lena reached out, taking both his hands in hers. The words of bonding are simple, but their meaning transcends language. Repeat after me. 2 minds, 1 understanding. 2 hearts, 1 purpose. 2 lives, 1 shared path. EMTT repeated the phrase, feeling a strange resonance building within him as the words left his lips. The luminous fluid began to rise higher, swirling around their joined hands. Now drink of the royal essence, the Queen instructed, releasing one of his hands to scoop some of the glowing liquid in her palm. She raised it to her lips and drank, then gestured for EMTT to do the same. He hesitated only briefly before gathering the luminescent fluid and bringing it to his mouth. It tasted like nothing he had ever experienced. Not sweet or bitter or salty, but somehow all sensations at once, a symphony of taste that echoed through his entire being. The moment the liquid touched his throat, Yimtt felt a shock wave of sensation. The temple around him seemed to fade as his awareness expanded exponentially. Suddenly, he could feel the queen's presence not as a separate entity, but as an extension of himself. Her thoughts, memories, and emotions flowing into his consciousness like tributaries joining a river. He gasped as millennia of royal history flashed through his mind. The weight of tradition, the responsibility of leadership, the fierce love of a mother for her children. Simultaneously, he sensed his own memories flowing outward, sharing his experiences of Earth, the horrors of the Proxima conflict, and the driving need for redemption that had led him to disobey orders and save the royal children. As their minds began to synchronize, the luminous fluid rose higher, now swirling around their torsos. Yimtt felt no fear, only a profound sense of connection unlike anything he had ever known. This was not the erasure of self he might have feared, but rather an expansion, becoming more while still remaining who he was. The ritual reached its crescendo as the fluid completely enveloped them both, creating a pillar of light that stretched toward the open dome above. Through their growing bond, Yimtt sensed Queen Lena's satisfaction as the ancient energies worked as they should, forging connections that transcended physical limitations. The moment of perfect union was shattered by a sudden blast of energy that struck the luminous pillar, sending discordant ripples through the sacred fluid. Yimtt felt Queen Lena's shock and pain through their partially formed bond, and instinctively pulled her toward him, shielding her with his body as another energy blast tore through the temple. "Protect the queen," royal guard shouted, rushing forward as chaos erupted. Through the disrupted connection, Yimtt sensed rather than saw the assailant, a robed figure wielding an energy weapon that should never have made it past the temple security. With military instincts heightened by the partially formed bond, he spun, keeping the queen behind him as a third blast headed directly toward them. What happened next defied explanation. The sacred bond, though interrupted, had awakened something in both of them. Yimtt felt a surge of energy that wasn't entirely his own, and Queen Lena raised her hand in perfect synchronization with his movement. Together, they created a shield of luminous energy that deflected the blast back toward its source. The attacker cried out in the Verdantan language, words that Yimtt now partially understood through his connection to the queen. "Death to the defiler of royal blood. The outsider will not corrupt our lineage." Royal guards swarmed the assailant, but not before Yimtt caught sight of a familiar insignia on the inner lining of the attacker's robe, the personal mark of High Elder Varric. Through their bond, he felt Queen Lena's recognition and fury. He dares attack during the sacred ritual. Her thoughts echoed in Yimtt's mind. This is more than opposition. This is treason. The temple erupted into chaos as supporters of Varric clashed with royal guards. Ambassador Reeves was quickly escorted to safety by Verdantan security forces, his face pale with shock. The royal children were surrounded by a protective phalanx of guards and rushed from the temple. Standing in the now turbulent pool, still partially enveloped in the luminous fluid, Yimtt and Queen Lena remained physically connected. The bond between them was incomplete, interrupted at its most crucial moment, but nevertheless powerful. Yimtt could feel her thoughts, fragmented but clear, and she his. "We must complete the ritual." Her thoughts pressed against his consciousness. Only then will the bond be stable. But there was no time. Guards surrounded them, urging them toward a concealed exit as more of Varric's supporters poured into the temple. The sacred fluid dripped from their bodies as they were hurried through hidden passages, still connected by touch and the partial bond. The ritual was not completed, Queen Lena said aloud once they reached the safety of a secured royal chamber. Her voice sounded strange to Yimtt now, both external and internal simultaneously. The bond is formed but unstable. EMTT swayed slightly, overwhelmed by the dual sensory input. He could feel her concern, her anger at the treachery, and beneath it all, a deep well of fear, not for herself, but for her children and her world. I can sense Varric's thoughts through you, he realized aloud. Fragments of his plan. This goes beyond just opposing our bond. He's been planning a coup for months. Queen Lena nodded grimly, and the attack on my children's vessel was the first move. He needed them removed to strengthen his position. Her eyes flashed with dangerous light. He will pay for this treachery with his life. EMTT felt the cold certainty behind her words, the absolute authority of a sovereign whose line stretched back thousands of years. Yet he also sensed her strategic mind working, calculating moves and countermoves. We need evidence, he said, already aligned with her thinking through their partial bond. Something concrete to present to the council. Yes. She met his eyes, and EMTT felt a jolt of connection that went beyond the physical. And our incomplete bond gives us an advantage. Varric doesn't know exactly what powers or knowledge we may have gained. We can use that uncertainty. EMTT nodded, feeling a plan forming between them, thoughts flowing back and forth until it was impossible to tell where his strategic thinking ended and hers began. With your military experience and my access, she said, giving voice to their shared strategy, we can expose his treachery before the council. As royal guards secured the perimeter, EMTT and Queen Lena began to plan their counterattack against the traitor who had threatened everything they both held dear. The great council chamber of Verdant Prime was a marvel of bioengineering, a massive circular space where the domed ceiling displayed a real-time image of the planet's twin moons. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing gently with soft light that responded to the emotional temperature of the proceedings. Today, they flickered with tense amber hues as the emergency session convened. EMTT stood beside Queen Lena, still dressed in the ceremonial garments of the interrupted bonding ritual. Through their partial link, he could sense her carefully controlled fury, masked behind a facade of regal composure. Around them, council members and high-ranking officials from various Verdantan castes filled the curved benches, their facial markings betraying a mix of shock, outrage, and confusion at the unprecedented events. High Elder Varric sat opposite them, flanked by his supporters. He appeared completely composed, his expression one of concerned dignity. If EMTT hadn't been linked to Queen Lena's perceptions, he might have missed the subtle flicker of unease in Varric's markings, the telltale fluctuation that betrayed his inner tension. Esteemed council members, Queen Lena began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. We gather under grave circumstances. Not only was the sacred bonding ritual interrupted by violence, but I bring before you evidence of high treason against the royal house. A murmur swept through the assembly. Varric leaned forward slightly, his markings pulsing with controlled indignation. Your Majesty, he said smoothly, all of Verdant Prime condemns the actions of the radical who disrupted the ritual. But to conflate this isolated incident with accusations of treason seems an overreaction, perhaps influenced by the mental instability that naturally results from an incomplete bond with a non-Verdantan. EMTT felt Queen Lena's anger flare through their connection, though none of it showed on her serene face. The evidence speaks for itself, she replied, gesturing to her royal attendant who stepped forward with a crystalline data module. With the assistance of Emmett Hartford, whose military experience proved invaluable, we have uncovered communications between Elder Varric and the mercenary group responsible for attacking my children's vessel. The attendant placed the module into the central console, and holographic projections bloomed throughout the chamber. Records of transactions, encrypted messages, and most damning of all, Varric's personal authorization codes used to disable the royal vessel's defense systems. This is fabrication. Varric surged to his feet, markings flashing angry red. The human has corrupted our systems, as well as our queen's judgment. The evidence was extracted from your personal quantum vault. Elder Varric, Queen Lena said coldly. Accessed with authorization. Codes known only to the royal house. Codes that not even your considerable influence could falsify. EMTT stepped forward, drawing on the military authority that had once been second nature to him. The attack patterns on the royal vessel match exactly with the tactical protocols outlined in these communications. As someone with extensive combat experience, I can confirm these are not coincidental similarities. Through their bond, he could sense Queen Lena's approval of his intervention, and something more complex beneath it, a growing personal regard that mirrored his own feelings toward her. Varric's composure finally cracked. You would take the word of this alien over mine? I, who have served the council for 3 centuries. His gaze swept the chamber. Can you not see what is happening? Our queen has been compromised by this human connection. The sacred bloodline was nearly extinguished by your treachery, Queen Lena interrupted, her voice like ice. You arranged the attack on my children's vessel. When that failed, thanks to Emmett Hartford's intervention, you attempted to assassinate us both during the sacred ritual. The evidence continued to display around them, irrefutable, damning. EMTT could sense the council members' shock turning to outrage as the full extent of Varric's conspiracy became clear. You feared change, Queen Lena continued, addressing not just Varric but the entire assembly. You feared what closer relations with humans might mean for our traditions. So great was this fear that you were willing to murder innocent children, royal children, to prevent it. Varric's supporters began to distance themselves from him, their markings showing shame and horror as the truth became undeniable. The chamber walls pulsed with deep crimson, reflecting the collective outrage of the assembly. I acted to preserve our way of life, Varric shouted, abandoning all pretense. For thousands of years, we have kept our bloodline pure, our traditions sacrosanct. This human would dilute everything that makes us Verdantin. EMTT felt a strange calm descend over him. Through their bond, he sensed Queen Lena's intention an instant before she acted. Show them, she said quietly to him. Understanding perfectly, EMTT took her hand. The incomplete bond between them surged, and the luminous royal markings that had begun to form on his temples after the partial ritual flared to life. Simultaneously, Queen Lena's markings brightened in response, creating a visible manifestation of their connection. The sacred bond does not diminish what we are, she addressed the council. It expands us. I remain Queen of Verdant Prime, and Emmett Hartford remains human. But together, we represent something new, a bridge between worlds that honors tradition while embracing a future of cooperation. The chamber fell silent as the council members witnessed the unprecedented joining. Even in its incomplete state, the bond between human and Verdantin royalty defied everything they had believed impossible. Elder Varric stands accused of high treason, attempted regicide, and the attempted murder of royal heirs, Queen Lena declared formally. What does the council rule? The verdict was unanimous. As royal guards led Varric away, his face contorted with hatred, EMTT sensed through their bond that this was only the first step in a longer journey. The conservative factions that had supported Varric's worldview, if not his methods, would not change overnight. What happens now? Ambassador Reeves asked as the council session dissolved into animated discussion. The human diplomat looked shell-shocked by the rapid turn of events. Queen Lena turned to EMTT, and he felt her question through their bond before she voiced it. We complete what was begun, he answered for both of them. The sacred bond must be finished, she confirmed. And then, Ambassador, we begin the work of truly bringing our peoples together. As they left the council chamber side by side, EMTT felt a profound sense of purpose that had been missing since his military days, but without the moral compromises that had driven him from service. Through their growing bond, he sensed Queen Lena felt the same clarity of mission, coupled with something more personal that neither was quite ready to name. The royal palace of Verdant Prime glimmered in the light of the setting twin moons, its bioarchitectural spires reaching toward the stars like hopeful fingers. In the central garden, a celebration was underway, a formal gathering to honor the completion of a sacred bond and the beginning of a new era in human-Verdantin relations. Yimtiti stood on a balcony overlooking the festivities, still adjusting to the changes wrought by the completed ritual. His temples now bore permanent luminescent markings similar to the royal family's, though with distinctive patterns that marked him as unique, neither fully Verdantin nor simply human. More profound were the internal changes, enhanced senses, a deeper connection to Queen Lena that allowed them to share thoughts and emotions across distances, and an intuitive understanding of Verdantin culture that no human had ever possessed. Contemplating your new role, Ambassador Reeves joined him at the balcony rail, offering a glass of iridescent Verdantin ceremonial wine. Yimtiti accepted with a nod of thanks. It's a lot to process. 3 weeks ago, I was a security officer trying to avoid complications. Reeve chuckled. And now you're royal consort and interspecies liaison. Earth Command is still trying to determine the appropriate diplomatic protocol. You've managed to become an entirely new category of diplomatic entity. Below them, the royal children were the center of attention. Prince Elian demonstrating a traditional Verdantin dance to a group of human diplomats, while Princess Mira and Prince Terran competed for who could more accurately mimic Earth expressions and idioms, to the delight of the mixed audience. They've recovered well, Yimtiti observed. Children are resilient, Reeves replied, and having a human hero now permanently connected to their mother has made you something of a celebrity among Verdantin youth. You're single-handedly making humans cool, if you'll pardon the ancient expression. Yimtiti smiled, but his attention was drawn across the garden, where Queen Lena was engaged in conversation with Captain Weiss, the man who had once ordered him to stand down rather than rescue the royal children. Through their bond, he felt her diplomatic grace, carefully soothing the captain's lingering discomfort at the situation. She's remarkable, Reeves said, following his gaze. The first Verdantin monarch to truly embrace change in over 1,000 years. She always was, Yimtiti replied. The bond just helps others see it more clearly, as if sensing his thoughts, which, through their connection, she undoubtedly did. Queen Lena excused herself from Captain Weiss and made her way toward the balcony. The crowd parted respectfully before her, though Yimtiti noted with interest that the traditional prostrations had been replaced with more modest bows, one of many small changes the Queen had instituted since Varric's failed coup. Ambassador Reeves, she greeted as she joined them. I trust you're finding the celebration satisfactory. Magnificent, Your Majesty, Reeves replied with a diplomatic bow. The new trade agreements signed today represent a historic achievement. One of many to come, I hope, the Queen said. With a subtle gesture that Yimtiti recognized as a request for privacy, she added, If you would excuse us, Ambassador, I require a moment with my consort. Once Reeves had departed, Queen Lena turned to Yimtiti with a softer expression, one reserved for private moments when the weight of royal protocol could be briefly set aside. You're troubled, she said, not a question but a statement informed by their bond. Yimtiti nodded. There are still factions that resent my presence. I can feel their resistance when we're in court. Change never comes without resistance, she replied. But already, attitudes are shifting. The younger generations especially see our bond as a symbol of possibility. Through their connection, Yimtiti sensed the truth of her words, but also her own occasional doubts. The moments of questioning whether the ancient traditions she'd been raised to preserve could coexist with the new path she'd chosen. We're figuring it out together, he said, answering her unspoken concerns. She smiled, the bioluminescent patterns on her temples brightening in response to her genuine emotion. Yes, that is the beauty of the bond. Neither of us faces these challenges alone. Below them, Prince Terran spotted his mother and waved enthusiastically, calling out, Mother, Yimtiti, you must come down. I'm teaching the humans about quantum resonance theory, and they're getting it all wrong. Yimtiti chuckled. The youngest prince had appointed himself cultural ambassador, determined to ensure humans properly understood Verdantin science and traditions, though his explanations often became amusingly tangled. We should join them, Queen Lena said, her formal tone belied by the warmth EMTT felt through their bond. The future of both our peoples is being shaped by these small interactions as much as by formal treaties. As they descended to the garden together, EMTT reflected on the strange path that had led him here. From a traumatized ex-soldier seeking anonymity to a central figure in interspecies relations, connected irrevocably to a queen and her world through bonds of sacrifice, honor, and growing affection. "You're thinking too loudly," Queen Lena murmured as they reached the garden level, a private joke between them referring to how intense emotions often carried more strongly through their bond. "Just appreciating the view," EMTT replied, meaning far more than the spectacular gardens around them. She took his hand, a gesture that once would have scandalized the court, but now symbolized the new era they were building together. Through their touch, the bond hummed with shared purpose and a deeper, more personal connection that continued to grow each day. Prince Elian approached with a formal bow that dissolved into a grin. "EMTT, you must settle a debate. I've told Ambassador Johansson that humans cannot possibly navigate properly without quantum entanglement sensors, but he insists your species manages quite well with primitive methods. I think I've been insulted and asked to defend human honor simultaneously." EMTT laughed. As he was drawn into the good-natured debate, with Queen Lena watching in amused satisfaction, EMTT felt a sense of belonging he had never expected to find, especially not among the stars, linked to a royal family of an alien species. The bond had given him not just a new purpose, but a home. From the highest spire of the royal palace, the celebration below looked like a tapestry of light, human and Verdantan mingling in patterns that would have been unthinkable before. Two worlds, beginning to orbit each other in a dance of mutual respect and cooperation, all because one man had refused to stand by while children were in danger. In the soft light of the twin moons, Queen Lena stood beside her consort, their matched bioluminescent markings glowing with shared harmony, as they contemplated the future they would build together. A future where courage and compassion formed bridges stronger than the vast distances between stars.